Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Jacobson. I'm a disability civil rights attorney and a disability counselor, consultant, and assessment specialist. And I wanted to talk to you about a major Supreme Court case that has me deeply concerned about the state of disability rights in the United States. And that is the case of Cummings versus Premier Rehab Keller PLLC. I'm going to go into the facts, and then I'm going to go into why I have so many concerns about this case and the way the court is looking at it. So first, the facts. Jane Cummings is a woman who was referred for chronic pain rehab services, but also has other diagnosed disabilities, one of which requires the use of an American Sign Language interpreter. She requested such an interpreter and was denied 3 times by Premier Rehab, so she took it to court. The Supreme Court is trying to decide the question of whether or not someone who's bringing such a case under Section 504 of the Rehab Act, as well as the Affordable Care Act, has a right to receive damages for emotional distress. In my last video, I detailed the Cummings versus Premier Rehab Supreme Court case that could have a huge effect on disability rights in the U.S. by answering the question of whether or not such a claimant can sue for and be compensated for emotional distress damages. Now, if you have a disability or you're part of any other protected class minority group, you know that a lot of the damage from being discriminated against is emotional. The humiliation, the isolation, the violation of your community. Those are all things that are problematic, and the main reasons, besides violence and safety, that these laws were created, laws like the Rehab Act. And so when Jane sues for emotional distress and the court has skepticism over that, it concerns not just the disability community. So the Supreme Court, in the arguments for Cummings versus Premier Rehab, asked a lot of questions of the advocates who were presenting on both sides. And I have a lot of concerns over the way that some of these questions were going. There were some justices who were strongly on the side of providing access and accommodations under the law, not just the Rehab Act, but similar acts like the ADA and other civil rights acts. But there were too many justices who were flippant about this case as a contracts law case and saying that the contract parties, the people who are involved in the contract of providing health services and receiving the health services in this case, need to know what they're getting into. And they were skeptical over whether or not Premier Rehab should have known that they could be sued for emotional distress if they denied the accommodation. Now, the law does have a long history of not appropriately recognizing mental health, mental illness, or mental harm in legal cases. For a really long time, you could only bring emotional distress claims if there was a physical manifestation or symptom of that emotional distress. So if you, for example, were so devastated emotionally that you weren't able to sleep for days on end, or you had a lot of stomach aches or headaches or migraines or things like that, that a doctor could point to and say, well, they emotionally must really be struggling because they're having these physical symptoms. And so the courts are still catching up to the notion that many qualified professionals are fully capable of assessing emotional distress, and they train for things like that. And the Supreme Court seems to be equally behind in understanding that fact. Long story short, if you're a member of the disability community now, or if you're a human being, because anyone can become disabled at any time, you should look to the Cummings versus Premier Rehab Keller case that's in front of the Supreme Court and advocate loudly as often as you can in whatever way that you can, so that the Supreme Court, their clerks, the world in general understands that people with disabilities deserve to be compensated for all of the harm that they experience due to ableism and discrimination, whether it's in healthcare, education, housing, or in the community. If you have any questions about disability rights, please feel free to reach out to me at Jacobson Law and Advocacy, 248-878-6940. Because of accessibility, we do accept text messages on our business line or at info@jlapllc.com.